Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are launching a psychological investigation into honestly the most profound mystery you're ever going to encounter. The very concept of you. We all just sort of walk through life assuming our identity is this fixed, solid object, right? Like a permanent fixture of reality. But what happens when we actually take a step back and deconstruct it? Beneath the surface, who you think you are is actually a super fragile convergence of cognitive biases, hidden emotional drivers, and deep evolutionary survival mechanisms.
And that brings us to this incredibly haunting central question. It's the psychological puzzle we're going to spend this entire explainer trying to solve. When the foundations of your life collapse, say your identity is stolen or fractured by trauma or systematically altered, who is the you that actually remains?
Section 1. The illusion of the self. What you think you are is a story. On the surface, it's so easy to mistake our identity for our resume, or our bank accounts, or our job titles. But beneath all that, developmental psychology reveals a completely different reality. Identity is actually a felt, embodied sense of self. And here's the crucial part. It requires a secure, safe, neurobiological environment to form. You literally need psychological safety to explore your values without the threat of catastrophic consequences. But because it relies entirely on this super fragile, continuous thread of safety, well, it can be shattered in an instant.
Section 2. Anatomy of a Shattered Identity. The Hidden Emotional Fallout.
When identity is compromised, whether that's due to financial theft or deep interpersonal trauma, it isn't just some administrative headache. It is a profound neurological shock. What people see on the outside is a victim dealing with some paperwork, but what is actually happening beneath the surface is a total collapse of safety. Your brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, gets completely hijacked. This triggers severe hypervigilance, clinical depression, and a total erosion of interpersonal trust. All because the mind is just desperately trying to protect itself from further betrayal.
Digging a little deeper into the developmental roots here, we can see exactly how early trauma actively fractures the self. When a child's environment is unsafe, those deep mammalian survival instincts just take over. They don't have the luxury to sit around and explore their true values. Instead, they have to contort themselves just to survive the adults around them. Authentic identity is bypassed entirely, and it's replaced by this hyper-adaptive survival mechanism. You don't find out who you are, actually scratch that, you just become an absolute master at being whoever you need to be to stay alive.
And this fragility, it scales all the way up to the macro level. Consider the staggering number, 16 billion. That is $16 billion lost to financial identity theft in 2014 alone. But beneath the surface of those billions is a much darker psychological truth. You see, it's rarely just about the lost capital. The true trauma stems from this devastating systemic betrayal. It's the prolonged, agonizing stress of fighting these faceless perpetrators and coming to the sudden realization that the very institutions designed to protect you have fundamentally failed you.
So how do we fix this? To solve this crisis, victims are essentially forced to fight a war on two fronts. On one side, you have systemic reclamation, wielding tools like the Fair Credit Reporting Act and HIPAA to forcefully rewrite the external administrative self. But here's the thing, that alone is completely useless without the other side, psychological reclamation. You have to actively rebuild your narrative cohesion using techniques like metacognition and diffusion. Fixing your credit score doesn't heal your nervous system. You absolutely cannot rebuild you without conquering both of these columns.
Section 3. The metaphysics of you. Investigating the bedrock of existence.
Now, to truly deconstruct the self, we have to ask a pretty unnerving question. If identity can be so easily stolen or broken, did it ever really exist in the first place? The philosopher Derek Parfit proposed a thought experiment that is designed to completely disrupt your baseline understanding of reality. Imagine a machine scans all your cells, instantly destroys your physical body here on Earth, and beams that data to Mars to build an exact replica. Does you survive? Is that replica actually you? The answer Parfit arrives at exposes a truly radical truth about human existence. He calls it Relation R. He argues that identity is basically a reductionist concept. There's no magical soul, no rigid physical substance that makes you, you. Beneath the surface, personal identity is really nothing more than a continuous chain of psychological connectedness, a super fragile overlapping of memories, beliefs, and intentions that are just strung together over time.
Building on this, the French philosopher Paul Ricoeur pushes the idea even deeper, splitting identity into two distinct halves. You've got idem, which is mere physical sameness, the measurable facts that a hacker can steal. But then you have ipse, which is true selfhood. Ipse is your capacity for agency. It's your ability to make a promise and actually keep it, regardless of changing circumstances. Therefore, your true identity isn't just some collection of static data points. It is the ethical, narrative coherence of your actions.
Section 4. Escaping the conceptualized self, the cognitive trap of your own mind. When we experience profound betrayal or trauma, a very specific cognitive engine breaks down. It's called metacognition. Metacognition is that higher-order brain function that allows you to monitor and reflect on your own thoughts. When trauma takes this offline, your mind gets stuck in this catastrophic loop. You lose the ability to synthesize new, painful realities. Without metacognition, you face a total collapse in narrative cohesion. The story of you simply stalls out.
And this leads us to the ultimate cognitive trap, and, brilliantly, the escape route identified by acceptance and commitment therapy. We instinctively trap ourselves in what's called self as content, this rigid, heavily edited mental documentary where we fuse our identity entirely with our trauma, basically declaring, "This is who I am." But the massive psychological breakthrough happens when we shift to self as context. You step back into the observing self. You realize you are not those painful thoughts. You are simply the vast, quiet container where those thoughts are occurring.
By consciously shifting into this observing self, you strip the emotional power right away from the trauma. You begin building what clinicians call psychological flexibility. You literally stop fighting your inner world and start objectively observing it. You realize that you are a complex, highly adaptive system. And while your sense of victimhood, your thoughts, and your traumas are going to constantly fluctuate, the observer, that true bedrock of your identity, remains totally untouched and intact.
Section 5. Reconstructing the narrative, forging an agentic identity.
Because we as humans are evolutionary, meaning-making machines, our recovery is fundamentally narrative in character. You can't just passively sit around and wait for your identity to return. You have to consciously author it. Clinical research consistently shows that injecting higher levels of personal agency into your life story strongly predicts long-term psychological well-being. You must actively shift from being the passive victim of a tragedy to the protagonist of your own hero's journey, actively reframing the trauma as the very catalyst for your personal growth.
Now, this isn't just some abstract theory. It requires deliberate, on-the-ground behavioral execution. What we're looking at is a rigorous 8-week cognitive behavioral therapy protocol designed to literally rewire your brain's neural pathways. You cannot rebuild a shattered identity by just reading about it, right? You rebuild it through consistent, deliberate exposure to slight discomfort. You start small in weeks 1 and 2 with daily wins and systematically escalate all the way up to rewriting your deepest core beliefs over a 2-month period.
At the absolute heart of this protocol is cognitive restructuring. This is a method to forcefully bypass your brain's evolutionary negativity bias. See, when distress hits, your brain treats its darkest, most anxious thoughts as undeniable facts. But by methodically executing these 4 steps, you basically force your frontal lobe to cross-examine your amygdala. You stop accepting your inner critic as the absolute truth, and you start treating your negative thoughts as mere hypotheses that demand objective evidence. These tactical interventions are literally designed to generate a living case file against your own self-doubt. For example, writing down daily wins in a physical notebook physically engages the motor cortex, which strengthens emotional anchoring. Stepping into your discomfort zone every single day provides your brain with literal, undeniable physical proof that you are safe and capable. In behavioral science, action must precede belief. You are generating the actual behavioral evidence your brain requires to let go of the trauma. And this all culminates in the downward arrow technique, which is the deepest layer of psychological reconstruction. You drill down way past the surface-level anxieties, repeatedly asking yourself, if this were true, what does it actually mean about me? Until you hit the toxic bedrock, the core belief that I am worthless. By finally exposing that to the light, you can dismantle it, methodically collecting daily evidence to pour a completely new foundation and actively choosing a new reality.
Ultimately, we arrive back at the profound metaphysical truth at the very center of human existence. As Paul Ricoeur recognized, your identity is absolutely not a static object. It cannot be permanently stolen by a faceless hacker, nor is it irrevocably broken by the tragedies of your childhood. Identity is a highly dynamic, ever-evolving process. To live is to tell, retell, and revise stories. We are always, in the truest sense of the word, the authors of our own lives.
So I want to leave you with this final thought as you step out of this explainer and back into the reality of your own everyday life. When you finally strip away your societal roles, when you detach from the trauma of your past, and you look right past the data that supposedly defines you, what story will your observing self choose to write next?